Hey there, and welcome back to the Elevate My KBB podcast. I'm Jacob Iwowo, and this podcast is all about giving you practical sales and marketing insights to help you grow and scale your remodeling company. And if you're in any other home improvement space, you'll find tons of value here as well. And in the last episode, we spoke about some of the biggest sales system mistakes that actually cost remodeling companies thousands, if not even millions of dollars in business. And today, we're actually going to be looking at the 3 essential pillars to building what I would refer to as a high growth remodeling business. So we'll cover how to generate and manage leads effectively, what it takes to be able to actually build a world-class sales process, and how to scale your business without burning out. And these systems are what actually separate remodelers that stay stuck from the ones who actually go on to dominate the market. So without further ado, let's actually get into it. So for me, the first pillar, as we kind of spoke about, is lead generation and lead management. And within that, I think that one of the first kind of points that I at least have come across in the industry is the idea that the cheaper the lead is, the cheaper lead, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better lead. And what I mean by that is that, in many cases, when leads are cheap, they kind of result in poor conversion rates. So an example of this is, I've run tons of Facebook ads in the past and still do for my agency. And on Facebook, you have 2 options. You can either run ads to a landing page, you can run ads to a Facebook form. Now, obviously, I'm assuming a lot of you guys listening to this right now have worked at Facebook ads agencies before. And, one of the key metrics that they'll talk about is cost per lead. Oh, we're able to generate a lead for $10 or $20, right? But in many cases, a lot of these companies are running these leads to a Facebook form. And Facebook forms are very low friction. You can actually get leads for very, very cheap. And, if you guys have experienced working with a company that does this, then what you also know is that when you actually give these leads to your sales team, the feedback that you probably got was that these leads were very, very hard to get in contact with. So let's kind of give another example. Let's say that each lead on Facebook cost you $20, but you were able to get in contact with, and in fact, for easy math, let's say they cost $10 and you were able to get in contact with 1 in every 20 leads. So what that means is that it costs you $200 to get in contact with a lead. And let's say of those leads that you do get in contact with, it took you another 20 leads to be able to close a deal, right? So now that means that your cost per acquisition is $4,000. Now, again, if you're selling something super high ticket, maybe that's a good CPA. But for a lot of companies, to be able to close a deal for $4,000 is not going to be the most scalable kind of business, right? But the key metric is that at the beginning, it costs you guys $10 for a lead, right? So with that being said, when you are generating leads, what you need to track are 2 main statistics. Again, there are tons of metrics, which we'll talk about in a second, that you need to track in an ideal case. But if you had to track 2 statistics for me, it would be cost of lead or cost per lead, but then also cost per acquisition or cost per, conversion, which is actually a closed deal. And with those 2 numbers, you're going to actually be able to evaluate the effectiveness of that marketing channel. Because, if you were to use a different channel that wasn't Facebook ads, for example, maybe your cost per lead is $150. Maybe you have a lead provider that charges $150 per lead. But maybe of those leads, you're able to close 1 in 10, right? Which means that even though you're paying 15 times more for that lead, because you're able to close those leads at a far higher rate, your cost per acquisition is $1,500 rather than $4,000, which is going to be a lot more scalable, right? So whether you're tracking this in your CRM, whether you're having a spreadsheet, even if you have to write this down on a flipping piece of paper to be able to have these numbers, right? It's very important that they're visible to you, you understand them, so you understand, which marketing channels are working best, and being able to, adjust your strategy, what you're spending your money on using that data. So speaking of CRM, speaking of tracking data, I'm just going to give you a quick kind of breakdown of what we track in our CRM so that you have an idea of kind of what it can look like. Now, disclaimer, there's a lot of stats in here, so bear with me. I'll try and get through it very quickly, but I'll explain kind of why we get so granular in a second. So at any time, I'll know exactly how many landing page views I had, exactly what the bounce rate of the landing page is, exactly what the conversion rate of the landing page is, the cost per lead, the number of leads that we generated. I'd know exactly how many of those leads we were able to get in contact with. Of those leads that we contacted, how many of those responded, what percentage of those responded, the cost per contacted lead, right? The cost per qualified lead, the percentage of those leads that were qualified, exactly how many appointments have been scheduled, the percentage of contacted leads to booked leads, the percentage of kind of top of funnel leads to booked leads, our close rate, the number of follow-ups per lead that we're giving for those that don't close, the response rate or the number of those follow-ups that actually get responses, and the percentage of that, right? And at each one of these statistics, we have KPIs that we actually hold ourselves to, so that, if we're slipping, it's very easy to kind of go into our spreadsheet and take a look. It will highlight red and we'll go, okay, cool. This is the issue, right? What are we going to do to fix it? And without that proper tracking for you guys, right? Again, you don't need all of this stuff. Maybe you have 5, 6, 7 of these stats, but without this, especially when you're running a, decently sized company, it's very easy to kind of let these leads slip away because you're not actually following up consistently, or you don't kind of, optimize your landing page. There's going to be these kind of cracks in the system that you won't be able to identify because you're not actually, tracking the data. So that's very important. And, then once you have that data tracked, the next part of that is lead management, right? So one thing that you need to kind of realize from what we're doing as a company, yes, we have all of these data to kind of understand, okay, from a lead comes in, what does it look like from the lead coming in to us actually closing? But another side of the equation that a lot of, contractors don't think about is the fact that the more touch points that you're able to create with a customer, the more trust that you build, right? So if a lead comes in, just because you call them and they, spoke to you doesn't necessarily mean they want to set an appointment right now. Just because you've gone into their house and, given them a quote, doesn't necessarily mean they want to move forward right now. Because maybe they don't trust you, maybe they're not ready, right? It doesn't mean that, just because they have a need that they want to fulfill it right now, especially with things like, kitchen remodels or bathroom remodels, these kind of bigger jobs, right, that are going to cost large amounts of money. So it's very important that you're not just tracking the data from kind of lead capture to close, but you're also tracking the data after you go into the house. How many times are you following up? What percentage of these follow-ups are working, right? So that you can tweak your kind of lead nurture, your back-end systems to be able to maximize the leads that you're getting, right? So that's the first pillar, lead management and lead generation. If you're able to kind of get this sorted, you're kind of 1/3 of the way to being able to really grow a business or create a business that grows, because you're generating leads that convert at a profitable amount. You know exactly what channels they're coming from. You know exactly what statistics or metrics are under KPIs, and hence where to optimize. And then once you've actually gone in, you've pitched these people. For the ones that don't close, you have a very clear strategy and understanding of exactly what to do after that process to be able to, again, generate additional revenue from the leads that don't close, or the ones that kind of fall out of the funnel through the process, right? So that's the first pillar. The second pillar to me kind of relates, and it's being able to build a world-class sales process, right? Again, I'm assuming, could be wrong, that the people that are watching this podcast, aren't one-man bands or an individual who's hiring a bunch of subcontractors to do the work and doing all the sales and marketing and everything by themselves, right? And part of building a world-class sales process is the ability to be able to, as much as possible, remove yourself from the sales process. Now, I completely get it with any, business that's been bootstrapped and you've kind of built from the ground up. 9 times out of 10, being an entrepreneur, being someone who understands the industry well, in a lot of companies, you're going to be the main sales driver at first, right? But one of the biggest things that, especially within the remodeling industry, that people realize is that you need to be able to step away from the business, or at least step away from the sales process, to, step away from the weeds, to be able to actually kind of see the forest and understand how you're going to grow this business, right? So the first step of actually building that process is to have effective training, right? Once you have a team in, even if it's just another individual that you're working with, one of the biggest things that I hear when I'm speaking to owners like yourselves is, I've tried sales reps, but they're not good enough, or they're not able to sell like myself. And that very well may be the case. But at the end of the day, if you have two people that are able to sell at 60% of the capacity that you're able to, you're now able to operate at 120% rather than your 100%, right? If you have 10 people who are able to sell at 90% of your capacity, you're able to 9x your sales capacity due to the fact that you've got all of these sales reps. And again, in business, in life, in everything, yes, we can point the finger, but at the end of the day, if we kind of, as much as possible, try and have the blame be internally, then we can actually do something about it, right? And I'd say 8 times out of 10, if you don't have a strong sales team, it's because you don't have a good training process, right? So you need to be regularly training your team on handling objections, whether it's price, whether it's timeline, whether it's trust. You need to, have them and have those objection handling processes drilled out. They need to understand the process. They need to follow the script. They need to, do all of these things. And for me, what I always say is that, a well-trained sales team is going to give you that competitive advantage in the industry. Because as I said, if you have even 5 sales reps that can sell at 60% of the capacity that you're able to 3x your sales capacity. Whereas that individual who's stuck in their ways and they just decided that, they're the only person that can sell for their company, they don't want to bring on a team because they're not able to perform, right? Even though maybe they are a better sales rep than your team, because your team has more volume, you are able to go out and do more quotations and actually sell more, right? And a huge part of that sales training process, which I see that some people, again, naturally, it can be a bit awkward, but some people kind of think that they're too, good for it, is role playing, right? You need to be using role play exercises to, help your sales reps mainly build the confidence in actually delivering the pitch and addressing those difficult questions, right? I'm sure that everybody has an experience of this, that, whether it's you selling or whether it's someone selling to yourselves, there are some objections, there are some kind of lines, some questions that you hear that either you're just able to rattle off an answer with, you're not going to say any ums, you're not going to say any ahs, it's going to be perfect, the tonality is going to be perfect, the pace is going to be perfect because you've just answered that question so many times that you know exactly what to say. And that, in most cases, if it's yourself, comes from the fact that you've been in so many homes, you've dealt with so many homeowners, and hence you kind of know exactly what to say, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be paying my sales reps to be able to go and just practice, and eventually get good after I've spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars giving them enough leads to be able to practice. So how can you do that in a more cost-effective way? Well, that's where role playing comes in. You can have, whether it's between sales reps, whether you're the one that's actually doing the role play, I think at a bare minimum, every single week, if not multiple times a week, ideally, you want to be having structured role playing where you're not just kind of doing the full pitch, because again, some of these pitches are, 1, 2, 3 hours long to be able to actually get a customer sold, right? You can actually break it into certain parts. So you can role play how they're going to walk into the house and do the first part of the pitch in some cases. Then you can actually go through the kind of pitch deck itself and actually, demonstrations of the products, if that's kind of part of your sales process, on another day. And another day can be objection handling, right? But if you're spending, 1, 2, 3 hours a week doing role play, then now that's as if they've got an additional, 1 to 2 kind of real life scenarios under their belt, and they're going to be able to pick things up a lot quicker, right? So that sales training, that role playing, that process is going to be very important in actually building your sales process. The second thing that I would say is kind of pre-qualification, right? So, now your sales reps, they're ready to go in the house, but if you give them crappy leads, they're just not going to be able to close, right? You could get anybody. If they can't afford it, they can't afford it, right? So make sure that, as part of your process, you're going to pre-qualify those leads before you actually schedule those consultations so that you don't waste the time, actually speaking to those kind of low potential prospects, because not only is it a waste of time, not only is it a waste of money, but it actually affects sales reps' confidence, right? If they've done all the role play, they've followed the script perfectly, they've delivered it, and they're just not closing, it's going to affect the way that they do future closes, so that now when they speak to a high potential client, maybe they're just in the wrong frame, right? So make sure you're asking questions about, their project scope, what their timeline is, what their, budget expectations are. Again, you don't need to give them the price on the phone. It's part of the appointment set, but at least kind of, say something along the lines of, hey, our kitchen remodels start at $15,000. Does that kind of sound like it's within your budget? And again, that doesn't mean that now you can't sell them on a $50,000 kitchen remodel if you have good sales reps, but at least they kind of meet that minimum expectation. And then make sure that they have decision-making authority. And there are certain strategies to be able to go about actually having that conversation and making sure the decision makers are in the house. I personally don't recommend using the term decision makers when doing so, but again, it's better than nothing. So just kind of making sure that everybody's present, so that it's not a case of at the end of the sales call, I need to go speak to my wife or my husband or, whatever it is. And then, the next thing I would say, as we kind of refer to, is the sales scripts themselves are very, very important. So you want to make sure that you have a clear script that outlines everything, not just the actual pitch itself, but have at least a loose script of how they're going to deal with certain objections, right? And you can allow your reps to actually personalize that conversation so that it's kind of natural to them, but it then also, through having that script, will be aligned with kind of your company's kind of core, value proposition. So that script is going to act as a guide. It's not going to be a crutch for them. So they're not just going to, rely on the script and say it very robotically. They're going to be able to personalize that message and it can guide them through exactly what you want them to say. And then what that script does is it allows for that consistency, because that's very, very important. Every client, should hear, a very clear and compelling message about your expertise, your service quality, and the best way to do that is to have a very, very clear script that's going to communicate that. And as part of that script, as part of that process, the kind of final point that, I'd like to hammer home in terms of the sales process is making sure there's a very, very clear demonstration of value. Again, as we know, there are tons of, these kind of one-man bands that are able to undercut the market and sell super cheap. And I always hear from contractors that, hey, there's tons of competition, they're driving price down, yada, 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 yada. But at the end of the day, there are thousands of companies right now across the world, in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, right? These are the areas I kind of work in, that are able to sell very, very high ticket projects consistently in the same house that they also got a pitch from Tom and Jerry down the road who want to do their kitchen for $6,000, right? And the reason for that is because they're able to educate their client on the long-term benefits of the service, right? They have before and afters, they have case studies, they have testimonials, they have project portfolios. Their sales process is very professional and they're able to separate themselves from those people to be able to actually close those deals, right? And through that process, it's important that you don't kind of have these common mistakes, which I find, which is the fact that a lot of people, kind of rush through the consultation, right? And they don't actually kind of thoroughly understand the client's needs. Before you actually go into your pitch, the first part of the call, you need to really figure out, okay, what's going on with this client? What's their biggest issue? Let's actually, as they say, peel back the onion. Yes, maybe they want a kitchen, right? But after asking a couple of questions, maybe you'll find that they want a new kitchen because they host a ton of, weekend get-togethers with their workmates and their families, and they want to have a space they can be proud of, that people can come in and they can feel really, really good about. So now, as you're going through the sales process, when you're actually building out their potential kitchen, when you give them a quote, you can speak to the different ways in which their kitchen is going to be able to serve that purpose of having people in the house and being a great host. And that's going to be able to separate you from Tom and Jerry down the road who just says, look, we have the best appliances and we don't overcharge, yada, 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 right? And when you're able to do that, when you probably find out people's needs through not rushing, you properly address their objections and you make them feel comfortable about the value that you provide, then now you don't have to overly rely on these kind of aggressive sales tactics, right? Because in business, what I found is that the best closers, they're not pussy. The best closers are not pushy. They listen, they build trust, and then they offer actual solutions to their problem, right? And if they do that correctly, then they can actually offer those solutions at a higher price to, again, Tom and Jerry down the street, right? So that's kind of the sales systems, right? And the final pillar, for actually being able to scale business, right? At this point, you've got good leads that are coming through at a profitable rate. You've got sales systems that you're able to bring the team in to be able to actually, scale the amount of leads that you're able to run. You're closing at a high percentage. The next step for actual true scale is having systems, right? Without systems, your business is going to be completely chaotic. And some of you guys might be there right now. You might be, you might have tons of leads. You might be, have, your sales process really set, but you're kind of stuck at the ceiling because as you try and push, as you kind of spend more money on marketing, things just get chaotic. Your sales reps, they're not able to get out to consultations on time, and out of nowhere, you can't really put your finger on it. But even though they're going through the same process, the closing rates are starting to fall, or the actual delivery of the projects, you're behind schedule, and tons of companies who are interested in scaling, that what they tell me is that, look, we're packed right now. We don't have the capacity to be able to take on more work, right? And that for me comes down to having at every single process standard operating procedures, SOPs. Again, it sounds simple, but right now as a business, do you have SOPs for lead generation, follow up, sales consultation, rehash, project management, review management, right? All of these different aspects of the business. Do you have SOPs for everything? If the answer is no, then this is an area that's probably stopping you from being able to scale. And what you have to remember is that you don't actually have to build out the SOPs for everything yourself, right? For example, you need SOPs for your accounting, right? I don't know about you, I'm not an accountant, right? I'm assuming as a owner of a, remodeling company, you're not an accountant. But what you can do is you can get members of your team to actually build them out for you, right? You can maybe hire a contractor outside to be able to take a look at your business. If you don't have an accounting team, for example, take a look at your business. Or maybe you have a kind of low-level accountant. You don't really necessarily want to build out your SOPs. Maybe you hire, for a consultation, a higher-level accountant. You have them in a meeting with yourself, this kind of subcontracted accountant and your in-house accountant, and you kind of build out these SOPs together. Your in-house accountant is going to kind of know the lay of the land of your business. The expert is kind of going to be able to give certain strategies and techniques that are going to be better than what you guys already have. And then you're also there for the conversation to be able to learn a little bit more, and just to be able to make sure that you're kind of happy with what things are, right? And what these SOPs do is they provide that consistency and accountability across the organization, right? It's a lot easier to be able to hold someone to a standard when it's in writing, right? This is how we do things. And once you establish how you do things, you can then hold people to that standard, and you can hire against that standard. You can fire against that standard in a very fair way to be able to actually, hire A players. One of the biggest things that I hear in the industry is that there's not enough, builders, there's not enough engineers, there's not enough people who are able to actually go out and do projects to a high level for you to be able to scale. And in literally 9 out of 10 cases, it's because you don't have the SOPs in place to be able to hold these people to a standard. Because look, yes, to be able to finish a countertop correctly takes skill. To be able to properly, put in cabinets takes skill. But tons of these, builders, these people that you're, contracting or hired in-house, they have the skills, right? They know how to do these things, but they just don't have the accountability and the kind of consistency to know not to cut corners, right? We all know that at the end of the day, especially for your employees, if they can, kind of cut a corner here, they're going to get paid the same amount. And in many cases, they think that no one's going to know, right? But if it's in writing, exactly how you guys handle the process, and now it's a lot harder to cut the corners, because when they do get found out, they knew that this is how we do things. They didn't do things that way, right? So again, in this whole section, for me, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things, but the number one thing from a system standpoint is that you need SOPs for absolutely everything. Yes, it is a complete hassle to build out, but once you've built those things out, they're going to be evergreen, and you're going to be so happy that you have these systems in place to be able to move forward with. So the second step, once you have your SOPs, again, only once you have your SOPs, is you then want to be able to, be able to have automation within your business, right? So what I mean by that is that you want to be able to use certain tools to be able to streamline kind of repetitive tasks, like, follow-up reminders or lead tracking, or in some cases, data tracking, right? And by automating these kind of administrative tasks, what you're going to do is you're going to kind of free up time for either yourself or your team to do more high value activities. For each team, that high value activity is going to be different, right? But automation, and in a lot of cases now it's going to be AI based, it makes people scared, especially within this industry, the home improvement industry, within the remodeling industry. People get scared by the term artificial intelligence. But if you're a business owner who cares about your employees and you don't want to just kind of be replacing people, you have to remember that oftentimes that's not what automation is about. It's actually about being able to free up that kind of focus, that mental space, to be able to do things that are able to push the business forward and actually scale, right? You'll be surprised if you have 20 employees and you're able to free up 3 hours a week, just 3 hours a week for each employee in your company. You now have 60 hours worth of time that you can use to push forward the business. Again, it's not kind of linear like this. In many cases, the actual ripple effect is more, but 60 hours a week is almost kind of 2 full-time employees worth of time within your business, right? And you haven't had to hire anybody else. You've just kind of added some automation into your businesses to be able to kind of free up that time. So there are tons of people that you can subcontract out there. You can bring people in to be able to take a look at your business and say, hey, these are the things that we do. We use AI in our business. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm an AI expert. I wouldn't have you contract me to be able to do that. But there are people out there, people that I know, that can come into your business and take a look and say, look, there's this task that you can use this platform for that costs this much, and you'll be able to save this amount of time and this amount of money, right? So that's just something to think about. And then the final thing from a systems perspective is making sure that you're making data-driven decisions, right? It kind of goes back to lead management stuff, and that's across everything, across sales, across marketing, across service delivery, and actually, building out the projects and things of that nature. You want to be able to monitor these key performance indicators, such as, the lead conversion rates, the job conversion rates. And, one thing that I found people don't do enough is the profit margins, right? Just to give you a quick example, a tool that we have for our clients is we have something called our job costing tracker and our profitability tracker, right? Project profitability tracker. It's a bunch of spreadsheets that we always advise our clients, unless they have a system in place themselves, when they're pricing jobs, let's do that in our job pricing structure, right? Let's then, when you finish the project, put in the actual cost, right? So we're going to estimate the costs when we're actually giving the quote. Once we finish the project, we're going to give the actual costs, right? And again, using automation, we're able to then take that information and put it directly into our project profitability tracker. And then after 6 months, 12 months, we have a very, very clear idea of exactly what projects are the most profitable for the business, right? With that being said, for example, let's say you do bathroom remodels, and there's 2 types. You have kind of those kind of luxury, bigger, longer bathroom remodels, and then you have a 1 to 2 day kind of bathroom remodel, right? A lot of companies will think, well, this bathroom remodel was $25,000, $30,000, right? And we're doing these, each time. This is actually a more profitable business model for us because it's more expensive, right? And at the end of the day, let's say it's at a low margin, say a 10% margin, for example. We're making $3,000 on that. Whereas our 1 day bathrooms we're selling those for $8,000, and we're making what you find out to be a 20% margin, right? And it comes out at $1,600. When you put it in the profitability tracker, what you may find is that these 1 to 2 day bathrooms are actually more profitable for you. And hence now going into the next year, okay, with our marketing, let's push for these 1 to 2 day bathroom remodels, because we're going to make more profit from it, right? And that's how you're going to be able to use data to identify bottlenecks and actually optimize your processes, right? So again, the three things, at least for me, are making sure that you have your lead generation and management sorted. You make sure that your sales process is top notch and really, really dialed in. And then you also make sure that your systems, are ready for scalability, right? And those are kind of those three pillars, right? So in terms of the information, that's everything for today. If you got value from the episode, I'd like you to do me a favor and just, send it to somebody who you think needs to hear it. And if you want to reach out to me, you can email me at jiwowo@elevatemarketinggroup.co.uk. That will be in the show notes. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn if you use LinkedIn at Jacob Iwowo, Iwowo. And, I'd love to kind of hear from you and maybe even your thoughts. So, again, please make sure to follow the podcast so that you don't miss the next episode, and we'll see you there. Thank you.